Alrighty. I want to welcome y'all to Math 2312, pre-calculus. My name is Mr. Smith. I'll be your professor for this semester. Here is the syllabus, which is also what you can already find in your Blackboard. It is a 3-hour lecture. There is no labs. I do expect probably give yourself about 6 hours a week to do homework, maybe less, maybe more. Depends on how good you are at the math. Um, Here is your required access code to Hawks Learning, the pre-calculus software. It comes with an ebook, but if you like a physical book, here's the ISBN number here as well. You do need to get this immediately. First homework assignment will be scheduled to be due the first Sunday of the week. You'll have a week to do all of your assignments that are due in that week. So you should get on top of that as quickly as possible. You can access my email through james.smith at Lone Star, or not Lone, Lamar State College Orange.edu or lsco.edu. I'm pretty quick on the response, but I'll give myself 24 hours to respond. Usually I'll respond a lot quicker than that. So don't wait until the last day to get your homework done, just in case there's something going on that Sunday. This is pretty self-explanatory. It looks like probably all of y'all's syllabuses that y'all have seen in the past. This is probably the biggest thing for y'all. This is the outline for the course. So you can see what we're doing each week, when things are due for those assignments. All of this will be in the Hawks Learning when you get that access code. Depending on how we do with the access, I may extend this to be due on February the 2nd. But by this point, I do expect you to have the access code within the first 2 weeks. And I'll let y'all know that within the videos. The way this class is pretty ran, I'll make videos for each week. You'll just open up week 1, week 2, week 3, so on and so on. Within that week, I'll have the videos for that week and then tell you exactly what you need homework wise to get turned in and done. You'll go into the Hawks Learning and do those assignments. The way Hawks Learning works, it is a 0 or it is a 100. So you have to master at least 80% of the topic to get 100. If you cannot master at least 80%, you fail to get a 0. You can do the assignment as many times as you need to get to that point. Do recommend trying your best. And then if you're just stuck, please reach out to me so I can help you out. Um, my availability is not the best, but depending on when your availability is, we might be able to set up a Zoom or we'll just chat either through email or through the discussion board on Blackboard. I'm good either way. Other than that, you can kind of see when your tests are. Tests open up on a Monday and is due Thursday. I'm kind of debating on how I really want this to work since y'all will be in a proctored class. I might make it on a Thursday in which you would have to do it within that required time slot. If I can't figure that out, it'll just be open up for 4 days and then just need to get it done. There will be no late work on it. So if you don't get it done by that date that is assigned, it is a 0. Um, so you have 4 days to do it. If you can't get it done, then it's a 0. Now, one thing, maybe you're having a rough week and just couldn't get to it. I do have 1 credit, extra credit opportunity, and you'll kind of see all the tests. So I would always make sure you're available through those weeks. I even have the final exam when it'll open and when it'll close. You'll see that it'll be due on the 12th, but it'll open up on the 8th. But there again, 1 credit, extra credit thing, final exam or will replace the lowest test grade. So if you do end up getting a 0 and you make the final can replace that 0 with this one. Or maybe you just had a hard time with the topics in those chapters and you failed the test and you did poorly on it. Well, you do great on the final, I'll replace that grade with that lowest grade. So let's say you make a 40 on one of the tests, but then you make an 80 on the final. Technically, now you made an 80 on that test as well. This usually helps my students tremendously. This actually helps them with that bubble. So if you are a B student the whole time, this typically will help you become an A, and then so on and so on. So if you're a C student, this will go to a B. If you've been kind of floating around that 68, 69 mark, this will make you definitely a higher C. And then so on and so on if you need to make Ds or whatnot. But you will be required to turn in your scratch work. This just kind of helps me prevent, you using AI or all the online stuff that's kind of hard to figure out if you did it. But I do require the scratch work to be turned in within by the deadline as well, and I'll have a Dropbox for you to put that in within Blackboard. Failure to do so will result in a 0 on the test, so make sure you have a scanner. Your mobile device will scan it as a PDF as well. If you have any issues, there's plenty of YouTube channels out there that have examples of how to do that. Or if you need to reach out, I'll help you with that as well. Here's an Adobe scan, again, which is free, super easy, and it turns them all into one PDF so you don't have multiple pictures. Again, I know AI is out there. It can hinder you. I don't mind it being used, but it needs to be used in the correct way. You need to be using it to understand it, not using it to do it for you. Again, when I look at your work and your work does not follow the way I taught it, I'll definitely know that you had an AI do it. I know a lot of ways to do different problems. So if you end up using a different way than the way I taught it, I'll be able to determine if that is your way or not. AI is pretty quick on telling me if they did it or not as well. So just watch out for that. Again, here's the a time frame. This is a 16-week course, 3 hours. Expect to spend about 6 to 9 hours. It might be more, it might be less, depending on the topic and your comfortableness with the material. You'll see that you got to make that 80% mark. It says 70 to 80 because the way sometimes it works, maybe you have to make a 78 versus an 87, depending on how many questions there are. So we just put 70, 80, but really and truly, it's about 80% of the material to be mastered. You get a 100. This will be 30% of your grade. So as long as you do all of your homeworks, you should be walking away with at least a 30. Super easy to get this grade. It lets you do it multiple times as well. There will be 4 exams worth 50 points overall as your total grade. And then your final exam will be 20. And again, I'll replace the lowest test grade to help you with that 50% as well. And that's pretty much what your course will be made up. You have your A, B, C, D, Fs here for your letters. This is for the college. I do not know how your high school will run it. Again, I give myself 24 hours, but really and truly, I'm pretty quick on answering questions. I check pretty regularly. It comes straight to my phone. So if you need help, just reach out to me. You do need to have your materials. Again, as I think about this, I'll probably give you 2 weeks for that first homework, but then the second week we'll only give you a week to do it, and that's kind of how the continuation will be. But I expect you to have it, the material, by February the 2nd. If there's some issues arise, please let me know. And then this is just everything else that you see: support systems through Blackboard, career coaches, all the services. Even though you're a dual credit student, you do get the opportunity to use the services at Lamar State College Orange if you are around. Success centers, library services. Here's all your student with disabilities acts. So if you have any of this, follow the proper protocols. It does not go through me, it goes through the college. There is a free tutoring service you can use as well. They do online tutoring, or if you want to go up to the college. If there's campus closures, I will let you know via email and via Blackboard. So make sure you check those regularly. Being an online course, you probably won't have any closures. You'll probably be still required to do the material. And then of course, all these different policies, credit transfers, all this stuff that's in every single syllabus, drops and withdrawals, incompletes, things like that. Login credentials. All right, so that's pretty much it on the syllabus side. So for this video, I wanted just to kind of introduce the course. Once you get your textbooks, we will actually start the curriculum at chapter 3. As you can see, Here, your first test is over chapter 3 and 4. However, I expect you to already know how to do this stuff in chapter 1 and 2. So there is homework assignments for the entire chapter 1 and the entire chapter 2. And then after that, it'll just be broken down by section. So I would like to just kind of review chapter 1. There'll be another video for chapter 2, and then so on and so on for all the continuous videos that will appear for you to be able to do as well. Now, when we get to these tests, I do have a practice test that will be, I'll send it out the Friday before the test opens up on Monday for you to practice over the weekend, and then I'll keep that test open up until that Thursday as well. So you'll have time to practice the test before you actually take the test. No, it's not the same questions. The numbers are changed, the order is changed. Everyone gets a different test. That's one privilege on an AI on my side. But you have the same type of questions. So you'll get an opportunity to practice, see how you're doing, practice as many times as you want. And then when you feel comfortable, then you can go into the test. The test will be timed. You'll have about 60 to 90 minutes to do the test. You should really be able to do it within 50 minutes, but I'll probably give you 90, and we'll kind of go from there. So again, make sure you know how to do it before you start the test. Don't depend on technology and textbooks and things like that, because you'll run out of time. You won't finish the test, and there's no retaking exams. So once you hit that start, you're going through it. All righty. Other than that, that's pretty much it. If you have questions about the syllabus or how the course will be ran, feel free to ask me as many questions as you want. I love questions. It kind of runs the class pretty well. But since this is an online course, most of this will be videos I make. You watch the video, you take your notes, you practice the work, and so on and so on. There is no required attendance. So that it's kind of like you go as you need it, but do realize that everything is due on a Sunday. Test will be due on Thursday. I try to keep it as clean and organized as possible, so there's no surprises in this course. Final exam will open up on the 8th, be due on the 12th. There'll be a review for you to work through, just like all the practice tests, and then you must have it done by the 12th. That will be the end of this course. I think that's pretty much it. So you'll kind of see when this is all due. I can't think of anything else, but if you have questions, feel free to let me know. All right, so for no further ado, I do want to go into a chapter 1 review. Now, this review will not be everything that's in chapter 1. Make sure you are seeing this. It looks like you are. But these are just some main things I saw in there that I just want to make sure you know. It starts off pretty easy and then kind of goes a little bit more difficult. But again, these are things that this curriculum expects you to already know how to do. So chapter 1 is really just all about algebraic expressions, equations, and inequalities. It's one of the major topics you see in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. So it's not something you're going to be specifically tested over, but it's going to be things that I require you to know how to do to be able to do the pre-calc. All right, so to go into examples, let's look at the first example I want to look at. And I just want you to just know how to find the distance between two numbers. Now, again, this might look elementary and then progressively get hard for you, but that's great if it starts looking pretty easy. So let's say I give you A equals 4 and B equals -2. The formula to find the distance, now you might already know the answer by just looking at it, is going to be the absolute value of A minus B. Do remember the distance is always going to be a positive number. So make sure you be able to work this out. So to fill this out, this will just be 4 minus a -2. So when you're working out formulas and there's a minus sign already and one of your numbers have a negative, this is important that you don't fall in this trap. Do realize then that two negatives make a positive. So you get the absolute value of 4 plus 2, which is the absolute value of 6. which gives you 6. Now, the flip side with the absolute value is technically this is going to be equal to the absolute value of b minus a, because what happens here now is you get a -2. We'll go right here. -4, which is the absolute value of -6, which is also 6. So that's why we use the absolute values, because these two things are the same. You're just trying to calculate the distance. So be able to work absolute values, work your negatives, things like that. So simple things for now. All right, so let's look at the next one. Now, one thing that's nice about videos is you can pause, rewind, fast forward, things like that. All right. So the next thing I need you to be able to do is know how to rationalize denominators. In our example that we'll see is it's going to be 10 over the square root of 7 minus the square root of 2. Now, to rationalize it, that means we cannot have any radicals on the bottom. Radicals mean no square roots, cube roots, any of these little radical symbols here. So what we're going to do to get rid of these is we're going to multiply what we call the conjugate. So the conjugate. And basically what that is if you'll have the absolute value of A plus the absolute value of B, and we multiply that by the conjugate, so this is what the conjugate will be, it's basically the exact same thing. We just changed the sign of the B term, or also known as the middle term. And then when you FOIL this out, this is what we see as a difference of squares. So this ends up just being A minus B, and then it'll give us a whole number. So when we work this out, we get the square root of 7 plus the square root of 2. But hopefully you realize if I do something to the bottom, I must also do it to the top, or if I do something to the denominator, I must also do it to the numerator as such. So this is like multiplying by the value of 1, because these two things would cancel. Now we don't want to cancel them because we actually want to work them out. So again, the sole purpose of this is a difference of squares. So again, it goes back to a squared minus b squared is equal to a minus b, a plus b. So in reality, when I multiply these out, all I have to do is just square the first term minus squaring the second term. And when I do that, I get square root of 7 times square root of 7, which is just 7, square root of 2 times square root of 2, which is just 2 with the minus in between. So that's the point of multiplying by the conjugate. After this, you have to do a little bit of distributing. So we'll kind of work that out like this. Those ends up being 10 square roots of 7 plus 10 square roots of 2. And then we can kind of work it from there. So 7 minus 2 is 6. And then we can simplify these as well. Well, it also helps to know that 7 minus 2 is in fact 5. Let's put a 5 here. And so when we're simplifying this, you can break it down looking like this. And then we can go from there. So 10 divided by 5 is simply 2. So we can do 2 square roots of 7 plus 2 square roots of 2. Now, another thing you could have noticed is here, instead of distributing, a different way to do this, and again, there's multiple ways to do math. That's what makes it so great, is I could have left it like this. And when I did 7 minus 2 and actually got 5, then I could have said, hey, that's 2 square root of 7 plus square root of 2, and then distribute it to get 2 square roots of 7 plus 2 square roots of 2. Notice we get the same answer, but different paths to do that. Good either way, as long as I can follow your process. Homeworks you will not have to require to turn in your scratch work, but test you will, just so I can see your work. Yes, you must show your work. All right. So looking at the next type of question, we're going to look at polynomials and factoring. I will try my best to make these videos about 30 minutes, but hopefully less than an hour. Just depending on the topic, it may take longer. Who knows? All right. So in this example, we'll factor each polynomial by what we call grouping. The process of using grouping is when you have four terms. So in this example, we have a cubed plus ab minus a squared times b minus b squared. Know your other techniques as well. Your trinomials using whatever process you use for factoring with a coefficient of 1 for a for 1 and coefficient of a of being greater than or less than 1. But be able to factor what techniques you use, if it's the AC method, if it is a fraction method, however you do it, make sure you know how to do that. And when we get to those type of problems in the other chapters, I'll try to do an example within those examples as well. All right, so here what you would do if a factor by grouping is you group up the first two and then you group up the last two. Technically, when you do it this way, there's actually a plus sign. So this did not become where you FOIL. There's just a plus sign in between those. I just wanted to put the negative with this the term here. So then in factor by grouping, you look at the first two and you just go, hey, what does a cubed plus ab have in common? Hopefully you see that would be an a. So then you would have a squared left because I took one a away from a cubed, plus b because I would have just a b left after I took an a away. Now what I do here, and this is what I teach to just about every student I've seen, if I have a negative as my leading coefficient of my first term, I'm going to factor out a negative. The goal of factoring by grouping is to have these two binomials be exactly the same so that I can factor those out of the two separate binomials that I'll get. And then from there, I just look, all right, what does a squared b and b squared have in common? Hopefully you see that that has a b in common. And then I'm left then with an a squared and only one b, but it becomes a plus sign because when I factor out that negative, that now becomes a positive. Another thing you could do is if you're unsure about your previous step that you just did, you could distribute this back out and see if you get back to the previous step. If you do, you know you did it right. If you don't, go back and check your signs and things like that. If you did do it correctly, or if the thing can be factored by grouping, you should get two binomials within each term that look exactly the same. So we'll actually factor this binomial out of each term. Now this is technically one gigantic term and this is one gigantic term now that we're multiplying. So I'll factor out the a squared plus b out, and then I'd be left with a minus b. And now we have factored this four-term polynomial into two separate binomials by grouping. So again, make sure you're able to do those. And again, this is just a review. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. In this example, be able to multiply and divide rational expressions. So in this example, I have y squared minus 11y plus 24 divided by y plus 6 divided by y squared plus 5y minus 24 divided by y plus 6. So when working out rational expressions and your division here, working on division, you want to keep, change, flip to make it into a multiplication rational expression. So what this means is we will keep the first fraction as is. So this will stay as y squared minus 11y plus 24 over y plus 6. We will change division to multiplication, and then we will flip the second fraction. So y plus 6 over y squared plus 5y minus 24. Now, when you are multiplying rational expressions, you can technically make this one gigantic fraction, and then you can cancel things that are in common. So for instance, I can see that I have a y plus 6 here and a y plus 6 here. As long as one's on the bottom and one's on the top, or one's in the denominator or numerator, you can cancel them out regardless of which fraction they are on, because we can make this one gigantic fraction. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to work on factoring these trinomials. So a trinomial can be factored in multiple ways. The easiest way is to, when it has a leading coefficient of 1, is to know that a trinomial factors into two binomials, where the leading term will be whatever letter you have here, which in this case is y. And your goal is to figure out what multiplies to your c, so this is your a, b, c, and what adds to your b. So basically, in this situation, what multiplies to 24 but adds up to negative 11? Now, if you're shouting out the answer, that's great. It's really hard to see that, right? But hopefully you see that this is going to be negative 3 and negative 8. Biggest issue I always get with students is, does the order matter? No, it does not. You could have said minus 8, minus 3. You're still multiplying. You'll still get to the same outcome. Now, what you want to do now is do the same thing over here. So I have a trinomial, leading coefficient is 1. So I'll factor this into two binomials, where the leading term will be the whatever the letter is in the situation. I have now, same concept. I want to multiply to negative 24 and add to a positive 5. So the signs do matter. This time it's still going to be 8 and 3. What's going to happen this time is, since I want a positive 5, I want the 8 to be a positive and the 3 to be a negative. So if you have a positive as your c, they're both going to be the same sign. So they're either going to be a negative or both positives. If your c is a negative, then they're going to have opposite signs, and you want to put whatever the b term is sign to the largest number. So in this case, the 8. So you can see here that I have a y minus 3, then that would cancel with this y minus 3, but I cannot cancel these two. One's a minus, one's a positive. So your final answer would be y minus 8 and y plus 8. And that's it. And when you stop there, you can't cancel out the 8s, you can't cancel out the y's. It's attached with the minus and plus, so there you go. All right. So kind of trucking along, I expect you to know how to work out complex numbers. Complex numbers have real and imaginary parts. So if I ask you to be able to simplify a complex expression, I would expect you to be able to do it. So for example, I have 1 over I to the 9th. One thing you need to know is I is equal to the square root of negative 1. I squared would equal negative 1. I cubed is actually just equal to negative I. And then I to the 4th is equal to positive 1. After that, it starts repeating the process of I, negative 1, negative I, and 1. So basically your pattern again is I, negative 1, negative I, 1, and then it repeats. So if I'm looking at 9, you can do this the long way. You can go, all right, well, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Or you can go, all right, well, 4 goes into 9 2 times for the remainder of 1. The remainder is what you care about. So this would be a remainder of 1. This will be a remainder of 2. This would be a remainder of 3. And this would be a remainder of 0. So if it goes into it evenly. So again, you might go, well, I'm just going to count to 9. But if I were to ask you what's I of 131, you're going to be doing that for a while. So what we'll do is a little long division. So 4 goes into 13 3 times with a remainder of 1, and then 4 goes into 10. Let's see what's that? 2 times with a remainder of 3. So again, that would be what I care about. So I to the 31 would instantly just equal negative I. And I wouldn't have to do this 131 times. All right. So since I know that 4 goes into 9, 2 times the remainder of 1, I can tell you the answer is just going to be I. All right. Alternative way to write this, because we can't have technically a I as a imaginary number on the bottom, because technically it's a radical. So what we're going to do is we're going to rationalize this just like we did earlier, but in this case, there's no conjugate to have to multiply by. So we just multiply by the exact same radical. Again, I is a radical because it does represent the square root of -1. And then I'll multiply the numerator as well by the I. So I get 1 times I, which is I, and then I times I, which is I squared. Notice that I squared equals -1. So now I get I over -1. Simplify that. Negative I is your official answer. So even though 1 over I is what it's simplified down to, you technically cannot have an I as the denominator. So you would rationalize it as so. So be able to work with complex numbers. The next thing you need to be able to work out is linear equations, be able to solve all types of linear equations. And one of them, one of the important ones that students typically do struggle with is absolute value equations. So let's look at those real quick. Now, as you're working on the homework and there's something like you're like, I do not remember how to do this, and he did not go over it, again, please ask me. I'll do like maybe a short little video, maybe we can do a video chat, or maybe I can just express it by writing it down and then sending you a PDF of it or something like that. We'll work our way through these online courses. All right, so if I want you to solve an absolute value equation, let's take the example, absolute value of x plus 3 equals the absolute value of x minus 7. Now, a couple things you need to realize here is this absolute value will always be positive. Same concept with this one. So it doesn't matter which direction you go. So what I teach kids is I'll say just choose the left side. Doesn't matter. You can choose the right if you want. But take x plus 3 and x plus 3. That part won't change. On one side, keep the equation the same. And then on the other side, change all the signs within the absolute value. So in this case, this would be a negative x and a positive 7. All right. Because technically, if I was to put this in absolute values and plug in the number, I would get the same thing. So let's take the example of 1. Right? 1 minus 7 is -6. Absolute value of -6 is 6. Come over here, plug in 1. I now get -1 plus 7, which is 6. Absolute value is 6. So that's why we're able to do this. And you can plug that with any number, and you'll never find a counter argument. After that point, you just have 2 linear equations that you can now solve. So this is the hardest part for a lot of students, so make sure this doesn't trick you up. After that, we're just going to solve. So I'm going to move my x's to one side and move my constants to the other side. But the issue is all my x's go away, and I now have 0 equals -10. Well, that's not a true answer. So does it mean there's no solution? It's just that's not going to be part of the solution. So then we try to solve the next one. I don't like dealing with negatives, so I'll always move the negatives over. If you like to move things to the right, I mean, there's multiple ways to solve this. We'll all get the same conclusion. So to move this over, I do the opposite. So if this is a negative x, I'm going to add x. And then again, I want to get my constants over, so I'll subtract 3 again. And when I do that this time, x plus x gives me 2x. This will go away, this will go away. And then 7 minus 3 gives me 4. So then I can divide by 2. And then 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. Now you do want to check that because sometimes there are situations where you'll get an answer and then you plug it in and it doesn't work. In that case, there would be no solution. But let's make sure it works. I see that 2 plus 3 is 5. Absolute value is 5. 2 minus 7 is -5. Absolute value of -5 is 5. So therefore, x equals 2 is your answer. There's a few more questions. Be able to solve linear inequalities as well. Those are the ones with the less thans and greater thans. So let's look at a compound inequality. So be able to solve ones like this. So -10 less than -2 parentheses 4 plus y close parentheses less than or equal to 9. All right. So be able to solve these types. It looks super complicated, but it actually is pretty straightforward. You want to start with the middle, simplify the middle as much as you can. So I'll distribute to get rid of parentheses. So everything else will come down. So this becomes negative 8 minus 2y less than or equal to 9. After this point, you would want to solve this as if this negative 10 less than isn't there. So the first thing I would want to do is add 8. And I would add 8 here, and I would add 8 here. Since this is a compound inequality, I would also need to add 8 here as well. Right? Now, from that, I can just simplify. So negative 10 plus 8 is negative 2. That will go away. I get negative 2y less than or equal to 17. Now, the next thing you would do is divide by negative 2, but hopefully you remember the one addition to the rule with inequalities that's different from equations is you would also need to flip the inequality signs anytime you divide by a negative. So this does become a 1, but then this now becomes a greater than. This would become just y. This now becomes a greater than or equal to, and then I'm just going to leave this as negative 17 over 2. All right, so therefore this is what you get as your answer, but need to be able to express this in any interval form, which basically means write this with parentheses and brackets. So anytime there's a line underneath the inequality, that would mean that it's equal to, and we'll get a bracket. Notice I'm starting from right to left rather than left to right like you're normally taught. And the issue is because I flipped the inequality signs, my smallest number is now on the right. So it's always going to be smallest number to largest number. So my other answer is 1. But this time I do not have a line underneath the inequality. So that means that it's not equal to. So therefore, it would get a parentheses. So line, bracket, no line, parentheses. This is interval notation. Be able to graph it as well. Don't make graphing complicated. Just go and say, hey, this is going to be negative 17 over 2, and this is going to be 1. I don't know how many dashes there are in between that. I'm not going to worry about that. But when you are graphing this with a bracket, it would get a closed circle. And with a parentheses, it would get what we call an open circle. And then you would just shade all the numbers in between. And that's it. All right, so a couple more questions. I expect you to also know how to work polynomial-like equations. So let's solve one that looks like this. So if I gave you something as parentheses y squared minus 5 close parentheses squared plus 5 close parentheses y squared minus 5 close parentheses minus 36 equals 0, and I expect you to solve something like this. This right here is a technique called substitution. So what I'll do is I'll actually let x be these two binomials here, y squared minus 5. And you always want to use this if you notice there's a pattern. Like if this is the same, this is the same, this is the same, then you go, I'll just use substitution. So what happens is this becomes x squared now plus 5x minus 36 equals 0. So this complicated polynomial has now become a simple quadratic. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to solve this. We saw earlier that a trinomial can factor into two binomials, where the leading term will be the letter, whatever letter is in it. So in this case, an x. I want to figure out what multiplies to negative 36, but adds the positive 5. Hopefully you're thinking 9 and 4, and then because it's a negative, you're like, all right, they're different signs. It's a positive, so it's going to go to the larger number. So I get x plus 9, x minus 4 equals 0. You would then separate these two as two separate equations, and you would get x equals negative 9 and x equals 4. The issue here is a lot of students will get it wrong because then they think they're done. But you cannot forget what you did at the very beginning of substitution. So I now need to back substitute and say, well, this is y squared minus 5 equals negative 9, and this is y squared minus 5 equals positive 4. And now we got to solve these problems. So when I add 5, I get negative 4. All right. Now, the way you get rid of a square, you just simply take the square root. Now, before pre-cal, if you were in algebra 2 or algebra 1, you were always told you can't take a square root of the negative. True, as a real answer, but this is an imaginary answer. So if you have a negative inside the square root, just pull it out as an I and then look at it as just a positive. So then we see that the square root of 4 is just 2, so we get 2i. Now, another kicker too that I forgot to say is anytime you take a square root of anything, when you're trying to get rid of the square, you have no idea if that previous number is a positive or a negative. So you have to add a plus or minus to your answer. Now, you might be going, I don't get it. So then you go, all right, well, 2 squared is 4, and then negative 2 squared is still 4. So you don't know when you plug it in which one will give you the right result. So that's why we add that plus or minus. We do the same thing over here. We add the 5. So I get y squared equals 9. Square root of 9 is y equals plus or minus. Plus or minus 3. There you go right there. So be able to work these type of problems out using substitution techniques. All right, last question on this video. I know it's kind of fast. I'm just trying to keep our videos as relatively short as possible, but also impact a lot of detail into it as well. But I need you to be able to solve rational and radical equations. So this will be our last example for this video. So be able to solve things that look like this. So the square roots of 14y squared minus 18y plus 4. Now, that did not do what I wanted to do. Let's try that. Square root around up to this point with a plus 2 on the outside equals 2y. So to solve these type of problems, I can't just go straight into squaring. I need to isolate the square root. So I'm going to isolate the square root. By subtracting 2 on both sides. And when I do that, I just get 2y minus 2. I can't actually cancel those because they're not like terms. But now I'm ready to square both sides. When I square both sides, this does cancel, and I'm now left with 14y squared minus 18y plus 4. And then this becomes 2y minus 2 times 2y minus 2. And I expect you to be able to distribute this out in a relatively quick manner. So you got your first, which is going to be 2y times 2y, which is 4y squared. And then you have your OI part of FOIL, so that'd be your 2y times negative 2 and negative 2 times 2y. What that does is you can technically just do a times b times 2. So 2y times negative 2 is negative 4y times 2 gives you negative 8y. And then the last part is just b times b. So negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. So now this is what I really have going on here. And again, it doesn't matter which direction you go. I like to avoid negatives, so I'm going to move the entire right side back over there to solve this as a quadratic. And again, notice I'm lining up my like terms. So that will all go away. This happens to also go away. So now I have 10y squared minus 10y. So I notice now I want to factor, so I will factor out a 10y because I noticed that's what they have, and I'm left with y minus 1 equals 0. So just like earlier, I can set both of these equal to 0 now. So 10y equals 0 and y minus 1 equals 0. When I divide by 10, I would still get 0, and then I would add 1, and I get 1. Now, you might go, man, that's a lot of work. I'm done. Woo. But you do have to check these to make sure they work. So I'm going to take these, and I'm just going to plug it in. When I plug in 0, this all zeros out. And I have 4, which is 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4. But then 2 times 0 is 0. So I see that 0 does not work. So now I'll plug in 1. So this will give me 14 minus 18, which is negative 4, plus 4, which gives me 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So then I do get 2 equals 2. So 1 is actually your only answer. To do, make sure you go back and you plug it in. All right, that is all I have for this video. I'll post videos for each topic each week. Each topic week will open up probably by like midnight on Monday. And then you have 7 days to watch the videos, do the homework, do the studies and ask questions as you progress through. Um, I'm excited about this semester, so if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any point via email or via Blackboard. Bye for now.